welcome back to Common Ground. I am here with Yousuf Syed, and we've been chatting about diversity today. And so we kind of have moved into our second segment right now, and we're talking about diversity in Hollywood and media. And so that's kind of your niche.
Right.
So this is perfect to have you on here today. And so my first kind of question and topic point I want to kind of make here and ask you is, obviously you create content, right? And so for me, it's do you think that diversity is important in the content that you're making? And then, so we were talking about this before in the first segment, and you kind of touched upon this, and I'm curious, how do you curate the art that you're making? What goes behind it?
It's a really daunting chart right now.
Yeah, right. Showrunners and this is the showrunners, and you can see non-white men are 6%.
Yeah.
That is right. Yeah, 6%. Well,
Numbers are stacked against
You're
me.
Okay, that's what I'm comparing. That's where I'm at. But yeah, so, what goes behind how you create content? Is it in your perspective, or how does it kind of come about? How do you kind of plan for that?
Well, according to 72%, they always say right now, they're like, oh man, right now it sucks to be a white man.
You're
in Hollywood. I've heard this numerous times where they say oh, now they just, kind of want to fill in the chart. So if you're a transgender Mexican woman, you're going to do great.
Right.
And it's just dude, shut the
Yeah, you're
but we're going to bleep that out, right? All right.
Up to you.
You can keep it in.
We're down with it.
It's what it was in the heart.
It was from passion.
Right.
Yeah.
This is specifically for you.
All right.
Yeah, so this is you.
Yeah.
This is a diversity report in Hollywood, and so this line is where it should be, right?
Right.
And so that clearly does not reflect that. I mean, that 94% is way too high of minorities, and then that sort of a gender, and gender is an atrocity, right? Look at the female writers in Hollywood, but then, we're specifically kind of focusing on race today and that importance. And so clearly, you're doing here,
Yeah. Don't show my parents this chart.
Oh my God, right?
For the love of God.
Oh no. But how do you, when you look at stuff like that, how do you create content then?
It's tough because
whose stories are you telling?
When you're a minority writer, you have to be able to tell everybody's.
Right.
Because when you're white, I'm pretty sure the writers of Friends never worried about
right.
writing, about somebody some other culture, right? And that was okay. But when I have to write a show, you're
I gotta think about everybody.
I have to have a white character.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people are gonna be like, "What?"
It's the Browns.
Is this a English Bollywood film? So
yeah.
I have work that I'm working on that doesn't include Desi people. It has other races and stuff like that, and it makes it tougher because you have to be more well read. You have to be a little bit more prepared and more knowledgeable of cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I feel like when you're a person of color, you have to come off as not biased towards your culture.
Totally. It's interesting how it works though.
I would never want to be I think, for example, a great comparison is Aziz Ansari and Hassan Minhaj.
Right.
Hassan Minhaj is known for bringing up his culture.
Yeah.
That's pretty much
his
the crux of all of his work.
Exactly.
And Aziz, you almost forget, if you listen to his stand-up, I don't think he ever mentions being brown in America.
Totally.
It's more of his dating life and his
just
relationship
universal
with Kanye.
Topics, right?
So
that anyone can kind of relate to.
And I think that's why Aziz is in the mainstream.
Okay.
It's because, it's not foreign to anybody.
Right.
I don't think he ever has to explain himself.
That makes sense, right? But also, so for I like how you brought that up, because I think Aziz and Hassan are two people who are doing their path right? So like so the way Hassan's kind of gone about it, and it's so funny because I hadn't watched his. So my sister had watched him in New York, and she's like, "You gotta watch." She watched the show live, and she was like, "You gotta watch it, right?" And so when it came out, I was really busy with work, and I couldn't get to it. And I had friends of mine who are white were like, "Kinsey, you gotta watch it." And I was like, LOL, like this is like how I come to this like special. And they're like, it's amazing. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I watch it. And obviously this is like, you know, he's from California, right? Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, he's Pakistan, or he's not Pakistan, he's Indian, right?
Yeah, he's Indian.
But like also very obviously similar stories, Muslim though. And so they're just, you know, when you're watching it, he's like speaking to us, right?
Right.
Like there's just so many, like it's our life being played out. And so for me, it's like, it's so interesting that like there's still people who are not people of color, or not even just people who are South Asian who are watching it and saying, oh my God, I can relate, or not even relate, but understand like finally the struggles that we go through, right, as just kids of immigrants. So even people, I'm sure, like kids of immigrants from, you know, non-South Asian families go through similar things like this, right? But even white people can watch and be like, this is hilarious, but I can understand like where he's coming from and appreciate his story.
And I think that speaks volumes, because I feel like when you're writing about your culture, mm-hmm. especially in like screenplays, they always, you know, tell you to really dumb it down, because, you know, people aren't going to understand the intricacies and stuff like that.
And I don't think he did that though.
No, he didn't. Yeah. And I think people pretty much understood it, you know, and and again, it always, of course, goes down to delivery, and Hassan Minhaj is great at that. Yeah. But I think in, you know, the big picture, I think it looks like, you know, we're just kind of getting screwed over, you know, in the sense of like, oh, you know, people just won't understand your story. I think they will. Yeah. You know, I think if you show it to them, I think they will. Yeah. You know, you saw that with films like with My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Exactly. Yeah, definitely. You know, I don't think I ever was introduced to Greek culture. Yeah. You know, until that film.
Yeah, and then a lot of people who it's, you know, even when I was talking about my mom, and sometimes I like tell my mom that it's like, what if I don't marry a Pakistani person, right? And she's like, just marry like an Italian or Greek. You know, she's like, it's kind of the same idea. And I was like, that's true, right? I remember watching, you know, My Big Fat Greek Wedding when I was younger, and I was like, oh my God, there's people like us out there, right? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's interesting because as much as like we're terrified of, because you're right, our stories can come off very daunting, and people will be like, oh, this, you know, you have this struggle on your shoulders and all these things. But I think at the same time, if you let people in, and if you give them enough credit to be like, you know what, I think they'll understand.
And it's, you know, it's important that, you know, we write them, because otherwise someone else is going to write them for us. Mm-hmm. You know, I had a meeting with a writer.
Oh, and Big Sick! I just watched this movie. This was really interesting.
Who recommended it?
That's true. Gustavo did. It was a good one. It was a good movie. I liked it.
It had its...
It was good for... I had like some like critiques. So I was like, I don't think all Pakistani families are like... And like all of the Pakistani actors had accents except him. Did anyone else know? Or
wait,
like...
I thought he has an accent.
Oh, sorry. He does have an accent. Yeah. But like even the girls he was like meeting with all had accents. I was like, this is not how it is. Like,
yeah, I think it since it's semi like autobiographical,
right?
You know,
he gets to kind of
you base it off of his experience, but you know, there's a lot of stuff talking about how he makes, you know, they see women seem undesirable,
right?
And I think that's becoming kind of like a trend.
That's been you're right.
And it's always been a trend for, I mean, not for women, but for men, like South Asian men or Asian men, to seem asexual.
Right.
There was a film, I believe in the 90s, early 2000s, called Romeo Must Die. I believe it's Jet Li and I want to say Aaliyah. And it's essentially a take on Romeo and Juliet.
Gotcha, right. Okay, makes sense.
Most famous thing about Romeo and Juliet is the famous kiss at the end.
Right.
Back then, they did a screening for the audience, and the audience was not comfortable with Jet Li and Aaliyah having a kiss at the end.
because it's interracial.
Right.
Weird.
And so they end the film. They changed it. They reshot it. They end the film with them hugging.
Oh, no.
And
that makes no sense.
Right. So there's, there it is.
Oh, no.
So, there's this trope of like this asexual type for pretty much all Asian Americans.
Right. No, totally. Yeah, that makes sense. That's the interesting part. And so, like, I think going back to the Hassan Minaj thing and then Aziz Ansari, right? So they're doing both things right, where Aziz, I think, like, so obviously, Hassan doesn't, like, hold back, in his experience. He lets it, like, define who he is. And he likes it, right? And then, like, he mentions his dad a lot. He mentions, like, his cousins and all those things. And then, obviously, with Aziz, like, I think what's really cool about his show and what he's done, like, just masterfully in his show is that he, like, brings up topics that are not necessarily specific to, like, immigrants or minorities, but just topics in general, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a cool thing where he's able to tell stories of people all across the board, right? And just beautifully done, where you don't even realize, like, you're, like, there's a lesson, right? But you're like, oh, wow, I'm thinking about something in a different way. So they're both doing really cool things, and they're both prominent, people of color who are doing really great things. And so it's helping us, right, seem more relatable, which is so weird to me, right? And I always struggle between this thing where I remember people would ask me, they're like, you should get involved with a lot of more Muslim sort of organizations and that sort of thing, where I always said that I wanted to be, successful, or with my accomplishments, like, I want to be successful and also be, like, Muslim and Pakistani, right? But I don't want to be the Pakistani Muslim person who's successful, right? Like, I want to happen to also be, like, a minority in all those things, right? Because it doesn't define who I am. And at the same time, like, I don't think necessarily they kind of, like, help me in any way. Do you get what I'm saying? Right. But at a certain point, like, if I'm in a room that maybe a Pakistani woman hasn't been in before, like, that's helping them along, like, down the line anyways, right? And of course, when I'm in a group or in a work environment with other Muslim women or other Pakistani Muslim women, that's great, but that's not what I look for, right? So, like, for me, it's like, how do you feel about, so just like in general, we'll talk about this, I guess. It's like the representation and diversity sort of problem in Hollywood. Like, why are there so little people who are represented? Why do you think, right?
Well, so I think when people think about diversity in Hollywood, I think the first thing that people think of is the Oscars So White campaign and everything like that. Mm-hmm. And I personally believe, my own opinion,
of course, yes,
I think people are directing their attention at the end result of the problem.
Right.
I think that
because if there's not that many,
if you're not
all white movies, then those are gonna go
right.
Yeah.
And like, the Oscars aren't gonna nominate Straight Outta Compton.
Right.
It was a good film.
Yeah.
It's not Oscar worthy. Mm-hmm. There can be Oscar worthy films.
Right.
And that's, now we're getting things like Moonlight and films like that. I think that's the thing. And I think whenever I talk to younger filmmakers, which is weird to me now, I think the issue is the focus is, I'm either going to be an actor, a writer, or a director.
Ah, okay.
And nobody ever puts into perspective of the business side of it.
The money, where, like, who's backing these, like,
movies? Yeah, you can write all day long, but at the end of the day, it's whoever is funding these films is what gets it made.
Yeah.
And
so who wants to tell these stories?
And it goes down to things like this, showrunners. So, like, I think at the end of the day, I'm coming off as a hypocrite when I'm saying, like, oh, I'm a writer.
Right. You're like, I don't want to do right.
Right. But I think we're looking, the conversation is starting now.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And, I can't look into a crystal ball and say, like, when this is going to end.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when things are going to get better.
Right. So do you think that you have a responsibility as like a person of color to do you ever feel responsibility to help further that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think I'm reminded of it every day.
Right.
You know, the fact that I am a South Asian Muslim writer.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm gonna put it in my story.
Yeah.
Because the first thing that they tell you in film school or anywhere is write what you know.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's like an obligation that I have to at least have it somewhere in my stories.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you know, I'm not doing my community a service.
No, and that's I totally agree with that. And so I think when I talk about I always tell people, and I'm always that person, I'm like, you should run for just like lower office, right? Just like your school board or your city council, like I have like a mission where I want to get all my friends to run for something, right? It doesn't have to be like Senate, you know, or like for Congress. It can be just like a lower level office that you probably will have like dedicate a few hours of your week to, right? But like you're the decision maker, right, in your community. And so I feel like just as a person of color, that I have a duty, right, to keep creating representation, right? So I feel like all of us have that sort of responsibility. And so that kind of goes into obviously government and going into Washington. And so I think we can kind of move into that. I feel like I liked this conversation because I feel like I had an understanding of somebody who is working in Hollywood, who's like Pakistani, right? And like what's behind your art and like, you know, what motivates you to kind of create it. Okay, cool. So thank you so much for this segment. This was fun. Time goes by way too quickly when we're here. But
I had some more in the chamber.
I know, right? I feel like I could go.
Warmed up.
That's always how whenever I'm at the end, I'm like, I can say so much. But awesome. Okay, so thank you guys all for watching the segment. Please continue watching. We have one more left, and join us. Thanks so much.